Analysis, which is a public policy analysis firm based in Columbus, Ohio. I'm also a board member for Gross National Happiness USA, along with Brian here in the front row, which is an organization a grassroots organization nationwide that is focused on promoting happiness by changing the way we measure progress and success in the United States. And being here and talking about worker cooperatives, Brian and I were talking earlier about how one big strategic advantage that like capital ownership versus worker ownership has is the capital ownership. If you're just focusing on profits, it's very easy to just quantify that. So trying to figure out other ways to quantify and to be able to measure the true benefits that come out of worker ownership and other alternative policy approaches is important. And this presentation in particular looks at that kind of on the macro scale. So we all know that there are problems with gross domestic product as a measurement of progress and success in society.
Is this something you can get?
Yeah, this is something that you can get. It is on the thing.
Sorry.
So, first, it excludes key economic activities. That is, activities like housework, like volunteer work, these things that we know that have economic value are not included in GDP. Secondly, it double counts inputs. And what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that if you go and pollute a stream and then you go and clean up that pollution, that counts the pollution and GDP counts the cleaning up of that. When really it'd be better if that stream just wasn't polluted in the first place. The third one is that it excludes externalities. So there are a lot of different economic costs and benefits that come with different economic activities that aren't just captured by that market transaction. So a very real one of those is carbon pollution. So if you go and if you buy power from a company and then they burn a bunch of carbon, it's not just the company that's getting your money, it's also the cost that comes and the warming of the world as a whole, but also the cost that is incurred by local communities, that like people who are nearby the power plant who could have higher asthma rates, etc. So what's the solution to that? One of these solutions for how to improve this is to look at a different way of measuring economic growth. And this year, 2019, is the 20th anniversary of the first Genuine Progress Indicator study. So the Genuine Progress Indicator, it is a newer way of measuring economic growth that was created by environmental economists to try to deal with these problems. And the Genuine Progress Indicator brings together 26 different economic indicators, broad economic indicators that are split into 3 different categories. The first is traditional economic indicators, amongst which are consumption and inequality. The second is environmental indicators, so things like the extraction of non-renewable resources and land use like deforestation, pollution of streams and rivers, the reduction in farmland, etc. And the third is social indicators, things like housework, things like higher education, these things that are either not counted in a GDP measure or things that are that have positive externalities like higher education. So what I did was I took the state of Ohio, where I'm from, which is the 7th largest state in the country, post-industrial state, and I calculated the Genuine Progress Indicator for Ohio from 2009 to 2016 to say, what happens if we look at this alternative economic indicator and look at Ohio's recovery from the Great Recession? What does that look like compared to GDP? So I'm going to walk you through some of the data. First, total GPI. GPI is the Genuine Progress Indicator. There are these 3 major types of data that are used in this, and economic is the largest. You'll see that this is the purple, the first bar here.
Light purple.
Yeah. And that the economic indicators are the largest ones, with personal consumption being one of the biggest ones. You see a small boost that comes from the social indicators, and then you see the negatives that come from all the environmental indicators. And I'm going to split those up so we can look at those a little bit closer. So this is the average over the time from 2009 to 2016. So this is just lumping it all into what the average is over those years, so you can try to look at it a little bit better. And when you look at economic indicators, you can see that personal consumption, this is kind of the base. This is just all of the goods and services that are consumed which is kind of the base for GDP, except in GDP they look at income instead of consumption. Afterwards, if you want to talk about the difference between those, I'd be happy to. It's really interesting, but not so important here. You see the major negative one here is on the far right in yellow is the cost of inequality. So there's a inequality readjustment that happens with GPI, which is wanting. It's not completely perfect, but it's one way to be able to capture the fact that inequality does slow down economic growth. We have a lot of evidence that says that it does, and from the evidence that I've seen, the growth in inequality over this time period really did hurt the growth of the economy in Ohio. As far as environmental indicators go, almost all of them are negative in Ohio. The largest one on the far right you can see over there is that on a per capita basis, the extraction of non-renewables costs about $6,000 per person in Ohio over this per year over the time period. Also large though is reductions in farmland. Farmland has been reduced in Ohio over that time period, and carbon is the third one there. There is one positive, and you'll see on the far left that little boost there. I think that's about $70 actually. There has been some reforestation that's happened in Ohio over that time period. I'm not totally sold on how they do the valuation of reforestation, and some of the farmland stuff is a little bit difficult because you're just measuring by a baseline of 1 year, and who's to say that year is like the perfect year of forest or farmland, but this at least gives you some idea. Lastly, social indicators. So you'll see here there are 10 social indicators that are used, and some of them have positive and some of them have negative impacts. The one on the far left there is almost $7,000 per capita is the value of housework. So this is a big critique of GDP, that if you go and get a job as a maid instead of just cleaning your own house, GDP goes up, but there's not actually any value that's being created there. Or if you put your child in childcare versus taking care of your child at home, there's some evidence that could actually even cause like reductions in social welfare. So you see all of this. You see how housework is actually a big boost, and it balances out a lot of the negative ones that come in this too. Higher education you see is a positive, over $2,000 per capita in Ohio. The value of highways and streets is something that's captured in here. A public good that is not traded on the marketplace, but that has a lot of value for people. On the negative side, reductions in leisure time here, people working more hours is causing negative impacts on people. Commuting is something that takes up people's time on the roads, and auto crashes is another negative that's captured here. So just one last thing that I'll leave you with. This is this is the difference between GPI growth and GDP growth over the time period that I looked at. So the lighter bottom one is the measurement of GPI growth over the time period, and the top darker one is the measure in GDP growth. You see that they track fairly well, though there are some differences in the time periods, especially between 2011 and 2014. Those, you see a gap between GDP and GPI growth. And very tellingly, from 2015 to 2016, if GPI was the way that we measured social welfare in Ohio, we would have actually seen a recession in 2016 in Ohio. So one thing I wanted to do was I looked at what would happen if you change different variables and if things had been different over this time period, and I'm going to show you a alternate scenario. And this alternate scenario is if inequality had stayed at 2009 levels and had not grown 3% over this time period. This is what GPI would have looked like over this time period. You see that I would have tracked GDP growth almost perfectly to 2014, and then in 2015 and 2016, GPI growth would have really outstripped GDP growth. So again, this is what really happened. If inequality hadn't changed, this is what it would have looked like. So yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.